Welcome, Andy, and thank you for joining us for this Digital Leaders short video series. I know it's a busy time in Australia and also all around the region with 5G and the virus and people working from home, as I can see you are. But thanks for joining us and going through, help highlight some of the key points that we think you're a digital champion for the region. And maybe first to lead off with, just like to ask you how you see Telstra and telecommunications generally and the critical role they play in the recovery of economies and the nation during COVID-19 times.
Sure. No, well, thanks for the opportunity to be involved. And I think even before we all came to appreciate how significant an issue and pandemic COVID was going to be very early in the year, we were already on the dawn of the 2020s, and I think on the dawn of another very significant period for technology innovation with the emergence of 5G, cloud, AI. You know, many people have talked about the convergence of these technologies as being on the cusp of Industry 4.0 or the fourth industrial revolution, and regardless of your what do you want to call it, I think that, you know, undoubtedly we're in for a period of very significant digital change. And of course, telecommunications sits behind enabling the progression towards a digital economy. And of course, we've all experienced the very significant implications of COVID and the associated restrictions that we've been under to respond. And it's really our ability to all move to work from home, to study from home, to learn from home, and to adopt digital technologies that's really, I guess, to the extent mitigated the impact as best it could, that has played a role. And I think, therefore, in coming out of this period, we're going to see a structural change and a much faster adoption of digital. And I think, you know, many countries are going to be looking at an acceleration to a digital economy as synonymous with the path to economic recovery. And so therefore, again, telecommunications is going to be a crucial platform in enabling that recovery.
Thanks for that. I mean, this COVID-19 period has also been a time when cybersecurity has also been raised as a big topic, and the importance of telecommunications and cybersecurity. I know you've taken a very senior role with the chair of the advisory group to the government. That's involved in other work around the region and internationally. Just wondering, from your role, you see again as telecommunications and solving the cybersecurity concerns and making sure that that's all in place as we go forward.
Yeah, no, well, sure. But I think if you like, the flip side of the acceleration to a digital economy is that obviously we're going to widen the attack base, if you like, from a cyber perspective, or increase our exposure to, or more of our economy to, the potential of cyber risk. And that was in path anyway. But of course, COVID has only exacerbated and accelerated that, because as we've all moved, as I said a moment ago, to study from home, to work from home, we're actually now operating in large parts outside of many of our normal cybersecurity defence frameworks. And so that's just increased the vulnerability. And of course, at the same time, what we've also seen is an increase, significant increase in the extent of malicious activity during this time, whether that's criminal or even state-based. And so cybersecurity has never been more important, and it's going to require significant investment in capabilities and in skills, and particularly in the area of critical national infrastructure is one of the things that we've been advising the Australian government on as they've been thinking through their cybersecurity strategy for the 2020s. Its critical infrastructure is such a crucial part of every economy and the lifeblood of every country. And the more that goes online, the more that then becomes vulnerable to cyber attack. And we've seen some of those vulnerabilities play out, not necessarily from a cyber perspective, but from the impact of COVID has impacted the supply chain. With the bushfires we had in Australia, that impacted power. And also what we've seen is the interdependency of many aspects of critical infrastructure. So telecommunications, as a good example, relies on power. And so therefore, the interdependency of those is really important. And so cybersecurity has to have a particular lens from a national interest perspective on systems of national significance and critical infrastructure.
Okay. So if we've got, as the digital economy extends and expands, accelerates, and we get more, our lives become more online, I suppose, what do you see as the role of the government when it comes to policies and regulatory and frameworks to encourage the investment and innovation to really roll out the infrastructure and capacity to support that?
Well, look, I think, any forward-leading economy really needs to be thinking of the next decade as a crucial time for enabling and investing in the infrastructure that will support the move to a digital economy and a cyber safe and cyber secure digital economy. So that's telecommunications infrastructure and that's cloud infrastructure as well. And so how that becomes enabled is going to be crucially important. So it's issues around accelerating the availability of spectrum for 5G. It's also being thoughtful about the economics of the industry. Telecommunications is a very challenged industry around the world with return on invested capital at levels which are not attractive for shareholders, and that's going to stifle investment. And so, candidly, I think that spectrum reserve prices need to be lowered so that governments are not seeking to make, large returns out of selling spectrum. Actually, the bigger return comes out of the development of a digital economy, which will be enabled where telcos can not only invest in the spectrum, but they've still got financial resources sufficient to actually invest in the capital equipment as well. I think looking at universal services obligations, many telcos around the world have either explicit or implicit universal services obligations which are imposed on them, which are understandable because they're protecting and supporting people in our communities and vulnerable people. And yet many of the services that we provide are mirrored in other sectors and by other providers, over the top type of providers that don't have those same obligations. And so ensuring that the regulation is regulating the same service with the same regulation rather than it being orientated at an industry level as well. The other thing I would say as well about regulation, it needs to be technology agnostic. I don't know about the rest of the region in as much detail, but certainly in Australia, our regulation is built up around whether it's fixed or whether it's mobile or whether it's copper or whether it's fibre. Whereas in fact, actually from a customer's point of view, a customer is relatively agnostic about how they're connected. They just need to be connected and have a great experience. And so I think, regulation and policy, which is thoughtful about optimising the experience for the customer rather than orientated around a particular technology, are just some of the areas. But I think the bigger point is now is a really important moment in time, I think, for policymakers to be thinking out over the next 10 or 20 years about setting policy and regulatory frameworks that are pro-investment and pro-innovation in telecommunications.
Great points. I suppose just move on then. Telstra has a long history of being a pioneer in Australia, and under your tenure, you've launched 5G and a number of other innovations to really be a pioneer, not just Australia, but also beyond into the region. I suppose, what do you see as the role and or the imperative for Telstra to continue to pioneer 5G and the ecosystem within Australia and beyond Australia, and to continue your leadership role?
Well, look, we're just seeing such an insatiable demand for customers to be connected, and that's both availability of connectivity as well as the capacity of an increased demand for lower latency, better resiliency, because ultimately it is what underpins the digital economy. And I think with the technology innovation that's coming around the corner, and not just even coming around the corner, is available to us today, it's going to need outstanding technology. The interesting thing, of course, about COVID, and others have said this globally as well, but we've seen, I think in our case, we've seen more or adoption of digital enablement and digital ways of working more so in the last 3 months than we've had in the previous 5 years. So what that says to me is that in that regard, technology wasn't the barrier. It was actually our willingness and our ability to adopt digital ways of working and digital ways of engaging. But, I think that it's only going to accelerate from here. And so therefore, from Telstra's perspective, that's why we've always chosen to be at the forefront of telecommunications technology innovation. It's why we've led on 5G. It's why we've got 30%, or 33% rather, 1/3 of the population coverage already on 5G. We'll have that at 75% by the end of this financial year across all spectrum bands, high band, mid band and low band. It's why we're very focused on developing that through to the edge and offering much more virtualized services across and IoT offerings. All of these are going to be great enablers for economies and for businesses in Australia, but also in the region, as you say.
Okay. One final question, if I can. You're a member of the GSMA board, a very important part, represent a large part of the region, really. Your points on the importance of participating in the GSMA and the Global Trade Association, and the importance of the trade association or the industry to coming together to discuss these type of things. You see your role in it as a leader and the importance for the industry.
Yeah, look, I think one of the critical things about telecommunications and where GSMA has played an important role in the past is interoperability. And so in technology, the value of the technology is that it works ubiquitously across geographies, across businesses, across industries. But that doesn't happen by accident, because a lot of the innovation happens from the ground up. And so how do we make sure that we have a whole ecosystem that is interoperable, where everybody gets to benefit from it? And that's one of the crucial roles that the GSMA plays, as well as managing to some of the points I made in the previous question around how do we make sure we've got the right policy environment, the right regulatory environment, the right investment environment to ensure that there continues to be innovation and investment in telecommunications technology right the way across the region, that's focused on enabling economies to grow, but also ensuring that those in our societies that are vulnerable don't get left behind on the digital journey as well. And I think the GSMA plays a crucial role across all of these social, policy, regulatory, technical interoperability issues. And I think it's unique in that sense from an industry perspective, because the whole world needs outstanding telecommunications, never more so than today, and increasingly so into the future.
Well, thank you for that. Thanks for your answers, Andy. I think that's a great insight on yourself and Telstra. I look forward to your participation in Thrive and the Mobile World Congress, and actually active in the board in the future.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.